Going through family court in Ontario can be rough. It's a system that pits parents against parents and often leaves kids in the crossfire. I interviewed 3 fathers to learn more about their experience within the system. And although each of their cases is unique, they do have one thing in common. Despite court orders granting them access, none of them have been able to see their children in years. This is Mark Scott. For almost 20 years, he's been promoting and entertaining for TVO Productions, playing the character of Polkaroo at live events. Mark has 2 daughters, both in their 20s, from a previous marriage. He also has a son, Maxim Scott, from another relationship.
My son is going to be 14 in September. The family court matter started before he was actually a year old. And because my son's mother had a previous experience with the family court with her ex and 2 daughters that she has with him, she had already a lawyer and she had already been through the scenario before. So when I went away on a tour for Kellogg's and YTV, a thing called Psychoblast, she actually served some papers to take custody.
At first, the 2 parents agreed on joint custody, but as Mark explained, she wasn't satisfied. They went to court again, and in 2001, she was declared the sole custodial parent. Vernon Beck is the founder of Canada Court Watch. In his experience observing the family court system, he's not surprised by this outcome.
Well, the first thing I started to discover is that there was a tremendous bias against fathers in the family court. And this would be about 19 years ago. That seemed to be quite evident from the time I first started. You know, tremendous bias against fathers. Although there were a number of mothers who were having problems as well. So it started to point that there was a general problem with not only with the bias, but in the court system and the related services that went along with the court system.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to whoever gets there first. She's the applicant and I'm the respondent. And even if I bring an application, I'm still the respondent. It is easier for a lawyer to process this conflict with a woman because women have always had more rights around children.
I think, I wouldn't agree with that statement. I think that both parties come to the table, if you will, with the same set of legislation that they need to deal with.
Shelley Kierstead is a law professor at York University's Osgoode Hall. She specializes in family law.
What I do think, again, is I think you've got to go back to more broad societal issues. I think that we have a society that is set up in ways where sometimes it's actually harder for dads to be as involved, even in the intact family setting, with kids. And I think that's changing, but I think that's traditionally been true. And then so it's harder when the relationship breaks up, right, to imagine that you can then step into that role as sort of the primary caregiver.
Another father who gave his testimony was Nguy Scott. He's a pastor working in Toronto. He also runs a charity which gives food and clothing to the homeless, and often goes to help the poorest of the poor in Haiti. He also hasn't been able to see his son, Nigel, in 4 years. Nguy has tried to rationalize why the court seems to be against him.
And what did we call this law?
Tender years or early years doctrine. So way back when, men had rights to everything. And this is where your whole human rights thing begins. Men had rights to everything.
When I asked him about the tender years doctrine, he spent almost 20 minutes explaining the history of it as he sees, spanning from old Roman law all the way to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
You can use those Roman maxims in court today. They're interchangeable with common law. Domain, you owned everyone who was on it as if they were chattel property. The chattel property included your wife and your children. This is why I don't want to mention the lawyers' names, because they are our lords. So that's the only reason I'm presenting this, not to forward you with a conspiracy theory, but that's why I told you I would have to explain myself at the beginning, is to show you that I inspected all of these things. I did tons of research with lawyers. It's set up in the system back to the early years doctrine. I never actually explained it. So here's how the early years doctrine went. So anyway, the power was with the men, right? Okay. Me big, me strong. And now we have a early years doctrine, which says that, but when the child is under 12, it is better supported by a mother.
Shelley, on the other hand, disagrees.
So, courts have said the tender years doctrine is no longer an operative doctrine. And so, I would say it's not like the court says, okay, the child is 2, therefore we're going to presume, right, that the child is best with mom, which is kind of what the old system did. There may be situations where the biological realities are such that, let's say you've got a baby who's breastfeeding, right? Well, probably you're going to need to make some sort of custodial order that prefers mom having more time with the child during that sort of fairly limited period of time.
Another problem that Mark sees is the willingness of courts and social agencies to go after parents for trivial and almost nonsensical issues. In one of the last times his son visited him, Mark's neighbor gave Maxim pea butter, a peanut-free alternative to peanut butter. Maxim was diagnosed with a peanut allergy when he was young, although Mark is skeptical since his son has never had any sort of reaction. In any case, when Maxim's mother found out, she took to the courts to limit Mark's access even more, stating that giving Maxim a peanut alternative could confuse him. Children's Aid Society representatives agreed.
You're losing access. Then she went to the access center and said, 6 months ago, my son said he had peanut product at his father's place. I want you to investigate that. The access center asked my son said no, but that wasn't good enough. And that's the thing, is that I can be accused of anything and I have to respond to that. I have to actually answer to the accusation. I cannot just ignore it and say, well, that's foolish. When she has been accused of many things and she doesn't have to answer to it.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because there's more money to be made by creating conflict and by not having a solution in the first place.
Most people, and even people in government, a lot of them don't realize that children's aid agencies are private, nonprofit corporations. Okay, they're not part of the Ontario government. So they are exempt from freedom of information, so you can't freely get information out of them. And they basically get paid for providing services to children and families and for doing things like adoptions.
Nguy has plenty of complaints about his experiences with the Children's Aid Society in Belleville, Ontario. Among them is that Children's Aid workers seem more concerned with digging up dirt against Nguy than they were with his son's well-being. One example is recorded in his son's journal. This incident happened at Nigel's school when he was in grade 3, during an interview with a children's aid worker named Eva and a school representative named here as Peacock.
So every time I see Eva and Peacock, they always have a notebook. Geez. So you know whose notebook that was? Mine. And it was sitting in my bedroom right now. What I do not get is that why would they put it in my bedroom? The time that I saw Peacock, my nose was hurt. I told her. She said, I ask the questions. You answer them. It is not the other way around. And I really don't care about your nose, even if your nose is really broken. So a kid had broken my son's nose at school, just turned around right in line and punched him in the nose. And I picked up my son and his nose was like this.
This is Mr. Pereira. He has 2 boys with his ex-wife. The couple agreed that she should have custody of the children because Mr. Pereira was unemployed at the time and the separation left him homeless, living with his brother. Both parents have moved on and remarried, but relations between them are still extremely bitter. So bitter that Mr. Pereira and his current wife didn't want me to use their first names or show their faces. They feel that their lives and the lives of their 3 young children are in danger.
But it's in the context, again, of being very vague. You know what? Let it all go, or else your twins are dead. I really didn't see the guy. He had a knife to my throat. I was afraid to move. I got cut a little bit. Scenarios have been created, a lot of perjury. Scenario, false affidavit, false pretense, malicious prosecution, unlawful restraining order against me. A lot could be done to us, a lot could be done to me, which will affect all 5 children of both first and second family, and an innocent woman who's a good woman.
What are my children's rights? Because we must have rights. We have to have rights as citizens of this country. We have to have rights. Yeah. If immigrants have rights, we have to have rights. Our children have to have rights, basic rights. So I'm trying to find the right procedure to actually establish that. And basically, she infringed on her rights and trying the legal system to find out how do I make a complaint that our rights have been infringed.
How did she infringe on your rights?
With all she did, with the perjury that she did.
Court documents show the alleged perjury and give Mr. Pereira's ex-wife's side of the story. She didn't claim that Pereira was a fitness instructor, but she did state that he had taken a class with the intent of becoming one. The lie that Pereira mentioned was the date of their divorce. They actually divorced on June 17th, 2009. Mr. Pereira also claimed that his ex-wife's lawyer was involved with a conflict of interest. A few years before she hired the lawyer, Pereira had hired him to write a letter to his ex-wife. The lawyer responded, saying because that was all he did, there was no conflict of interest. When we spoke, it was clear that Mr. Pereira had suffered a great deal emotionally.
Why is it that I can't access the rights that were given to me? Why is it that I have to fight hard? Why is it that I have to be threatened with harassment? But that judge should have the empathy to feel what I feel and how hurt that guy feels because he can't protect his children. What does that guy have to do? Commit suicide? Kill people? Blow people up? What does the guy have to do? What does the guy have to do? Look at me. Should I be scared? Why should I be? What the fuck? Oh, I'm angry. What does this guy have to do?
The people that you've seen have all found themselves on the wrong side of family law. Each of them have felt the emotional pain of being alienated from their children. And while their circumstances and how they've reacted to them are all different, they all agree on one point. Something in the family law system needs to change.